My name is Dan Yaseen, and I'm an anti-war and anti-empire activist. Today is March 18, 2020, third Wednesday of the month. Every third Wednesday from 3 to 3:30 p.m., I interview authors, scholars, bloggers, columnists, and activists who help us look at our world through the prism of American imperialism. On the show, we talk about U.S. foreign and domestic policy and the actions of the military, industrial, congressional surveillance complex. These actions have severe consequences not only for the people here in America, but also for the people in other countries. Today, we have Jeff J. Brown on telephone with us. Hello, Jeff.
Hey, Dan, how are you doing? Greetings from Asia.
Thank you for being my guest on the show. Jeff Brown is a geopolitical analyst, journalist, lecturer, and author who currently lives in Chiang Mai, Thailand. Jeff grew up in Oklahoma. He received a BS from Oklahoma State University and an MS from Purdue University. He has also lived in Brazil, Middle East, Africa, and France. He is the author of the China Trilogy, which consists of 44 days backpacking in China, China Rising, Capitalist Roads, Socialist Destination, and China is Communist, damn it, Dawn of the Red Dynasty. His forthcoming book, Faster Than a Speeding Bullet, The Chinese People's Unstoppable Socialist Dream for Global Leadership into the 22nd Century, will be released in December 2020. His website is www.chinarising.puntopress.com. Punto Press, Puntopress. Jeff, while China is about to declare victory over coronavirus crisis, the cases in the U.S. are rising rapidly. Over 170 countries have been affected by coronavirus so far, and countries have reacted differently. Give us a summary of what China did to contain the coronavirus.
Yes, thank you, Dan. That was a very lovely introduction, and I really appreciate it. I feel humbled. The Chinese, being a socialist country, are able to organize the government, businesses, and the people in emergencies, and just also in planning the economy and making people happier and healthier and more prosperous. But anyway, when they discovered the coronavirus in December in Wuhan, in Hubei, which is on the Yangtze River in China, they immediately mobilized, and it was portrayed by President Xi Jinping as a people's war. They knew they were on a war footing. They knew war had been declared against them with the coronavirus. People's war is the same language that Mao Zedong used back during the Korean War, when the United States flagrantly bombed North Korea and China with germ warfare, and even Xi Jinping called this coronavirus, a devil, which is an oblique way of talking about foreigners, because back when China was being occupied and raped and plundered by the West, they used to call the foreigners, the colonialists and the imperialists, their foreign devils. So they mobilized. I mean, I was in touch with, I lived in China for 16 years, and we just moved to Thailand to retire. But I'm in daily contact with Chinese around the country. And it's just amazing what they did. I mean, everybody realized the gravity of the situation. Everybody subconsciously knew they were being attacked by an outside force. This was war, and they treated it as war. People were immediately told to stay in their compounds. You could not leave the compound. Only one person could leave each apartment every 2 days to go buy necessities. They had to wear a mask, of course, and of course in China they're free, practically free, and available. And they checked your temperature leaving the compound. They checked your temperature coming back to the compound. As things loosened up in February and March, people started going back to work, but they still had to have their temperature checked at the gate coming and going from where they lived. And then they had to be checked when they got to work. And then they had to be checked every 4 hours, their temperature at work. It's just incredibly organized. And because of that, and of course, if your temperature got up to 38, you were immediately sent to the hospital to be tested. So this is how a socialist country can respond to emergencies. And the United States has not been organized like that since World War II, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt essentially nationalized industry and business to rearm the United States to fight in World War II.
The United States and the European countries have the highest number of new deaths, cases and deaths in the last few days. In the U.S., people are still having trouble getting tested, and it has one of the worst death rates per million of population. Give us your take on what is happening in the United States as much as you know.
Well, the United States is a neoliberal capitalist jungle, and so people have to adapt to that. There was in my WeChat forum, somebody put up a deal. A couple in Vancouver, Canada, went and spent $70,000 to buy up all of the sanitary wipes. The hand wipes. They bought out the entire stock of all of the hand wipes from all the big like Costco and places like that. And then they were turning around and selling them for four times the cost on Amazon, and they made $100,000. They were making, and they said, we're hustlers. That is the mentality in the United States. It's dog eat dog. There's no solidarity. Trump tried to strong arm and bribe a company in Germany to exclusively offer their upcoming coronavirus vaccine to only be available to Americans. This is the lizard brain. This is the lizard brain behavior of Western capitalism, and Hong Kong is no different. They have essentially shut the schools down for the rest of the year in Hong Kong, because they can't get enough masks, because people are scalping them for many times more than they're worth, and the government's not doing anything to try to provide masks to everybody. I've heard in the United States they're trying to make the test available, but it's when your life and death is reduced to making money, and you're a profit point, that changes the whole complexity, the whole nature of daily life, and you can just see the difference between in the West. The president of Serbia came out and announced that that the idea of European solidarity and union was nothing more than a fairy tale on paper. They're not helping them. And he said that, and he called Xi Jinping his brother, and he said the Chinese are the only people that are helping us and can help us with this problem. So this is a huge dynamic, global dynamic between socialist countries like Cuba, which just took in a British cruise ship and will take care of those people for free and not charge them anything. The boat has COVID-19. The people are infected with COVID-19. Those British citizens will get treated in Cuba for free, whereas their journalists and talking heads in Britain are saying it's a good thing. You know, COVID will help thin out kill dead people, so we don't have to spend so much money on national health insurance. That's the difference between socialism and capitalism.
Okay, you mentioned about China containing and what Serbian president said. Give us some. I think I've read that China is helping some countries and sending stuff to them. Just give us a brief.
Oh, absolutely. They sent teams. No questions asked. No money asked. They sent entire teams of experienced medical. They actually call them shock troops because these people can go in and take care of a health emergency. And they sent, to Italy, to France, to Spain. China is doing more to help Europe than Europe and the United States. China sent 5 million masks for free. They just gave 2,000 something. They filled up an entire 767. Using a China flagship jet. Since nobody's flying anymore, now all of China's state-owned airline companies, of course, they're all state-owned. They're not private, for profit. They're flying all over the world. They're picking up 50 million Chinese around the world are contributing to help China. China Air and China Eastern and China Southern are flying empty planes to Australia and the United States and Europe and everywhere else. Loading up, Chinese are contributing millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of stuff to be flown back at no cost. They're not charging anybody anything to help the people in Wuhan. So this is what China does, and when the United States attacked the China with this coronavirus, and the evidence is overwhelming that they did, that if they thought they were going to destroy China and destroy the Communist Party and the image of the Communist Party and the image of the government, it's done the exact opposite. It has reinforced. I interviewed 5 or 6 Chinese people and put them on my show, and they all said we are deeply indebted to the party. We're deeply indebted to the government for saving the country. And then you just look at what China's doing around the rest of the world, what Cuba's doing. They've got that interferase drug that can do miracles to cure people that have COVID. So it's the socialist countries that are responding and helping the rest of the world, while Europe and the United States and Canada and Australia and New Zealand and of course Israel are trying to figure out how they can make money out of all this.
You are listening to Speaking Truth to Empire on KFCF 88.1 FM, independently owned and locally operated since 1975 in Fresno. We are speaking with Jeff J. Brown, a geopolitical analyst and author, about the coronavirus. virus crisis. Let's talk about the geopolitical impact of COVID-19 global pandemic. The economic fallout will be huge. Before we talk about how China and the US will be impacted, tell our audience about Putin's move to break up of OPEC Plus and refusing to cut the Russian oil production to keep the oil prices up, which helps America's fracking oil production.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is profound because, of course, Russia works very, very closely with China in the energy sector. There's cross investment in both countries. Russia is rapidly becoming the largest supplier of gas and oil to China with their huge Siberian oil lines feeding oil and gas into China, and they've negotiated a 30-year contract to sell gas and oil. In fact, it was the largest contract, I think, in the history of the world. It was billions and billions and billions of dollars. So, and I think Putin realizes, he knows, too, that the United States for years was collecting Slavic DNA. Harvard and all these, all the named universities in the United States were running around Russia collecting Slavic DNA to obviously do what they did in China, and that is create a specific ethnic bioweapon to only attack Chinese. And I've written about this also on my website. And then, of course, they found out that the COVID-19 variant in Iran is different than the one in China, which is different than the one in Italy. So it's pretty obvious that that this COVID is being used to attack global capitalism's enemies, and that includes China, of course, and Iran, which needs no explanation. But people also forget that Italy was the first G7 country to sign a memorandum of understanding with China for the Belt and Road Initiative, and the neocons in Washington thought that was unforgivable, and I think we can see what's the results of it happening today. Anyway, back to Putin. That's a well-managed country. The central bank actually works for the people, and Putin basically, Saudi Arabia panicked and started talking discounts and heavy discounts as soon as the price of oil dropped, and Putin realized that they could be next. The next COVID-19 or 20 or whatever could be against Slavic people. I think because of all the DNA collection that went on for years in Russia, and I think this whole dynamic, this dialectic between the East and the West, capitalism, brutal. Well, to me, capitalism is brutal anyway. It's just a repetition, but it's capitalism versus socialism on a global scale, state-owned banks versus private banks, planned economies versus jungle economies. And so basically now what's happened is Putin is siding with China. In doing this, because they can supply oil and gas through their pipelines to China, and not have to worry about being blockaded, the Straits of Hormuz, and for Iran and Saudi Arabia, etc. So Putin has made a huge decision that he has decided to basically say to heck with the West, which of course includes Saudi Arabia and the Gulf kingdoms who are all aligned with Israel and et cetera. I think Putin's fed up with all the shenanigans, in Syria. He's fed up with all of the shenanigans in Iraq, the occupation, the proxy armies, the Western proxy armies that he's fighting in Syria. The Russians are fighting in Syria. Ukraine, 2014 Maidan. I just think he's had it. And so he is now aligning himself with China, and not only China, but as you know, Dan, there's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO, of which Pakistan is a member, India, China, Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and several other countries. And just yesterday or the day before yesterday, they had a meeting, and this is cataclysmic. I mean, in terms of the West, they decided to start doing all of their intercountry trade in local currencies and to buy and sell each other bonds in their local currencies and quit using the dollar and the euro. So, I mean, and when you take China and Russia, what they represent, economically and as far as global energy, that's massive. That they're going to start doing that. India, of course, just joined, so it's which has a huge economy as well. So this is a big deal. I think we're just basically seeing the Bretton Woods dictatorship after World War II with the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency. It's all being blown apart before our very eyes.
Yes, it seems this coronavirus or COVID-19 crisis has exposed the U.S. hegemony as a house of cards which is about to collapse. Give us your analysis of how China and United States will be impacted economically by this crisis.
Well, first off, remember that if there is a global depression, it's going to hurt people like you and me. It's going to hurt the waitress with two kids, working for minimum wage at the restaurant in Fresno. It's going to hurt the blue-collar workers. It's going to hurt the low-level white-collar workers. It's going to hurt everybody, the 99%. It is not going to hurt the 1%. They will just turn right back around in the West, and they will turn back around and buy our assets that we've lost for 10 cents on the dollar. I mean, they don't call it disaster capitalism, and they don't call these people vulture capitalists for nothing. So they will come in, they will swoop in, we will starve to death. If there really is a depression, if there really is a global depression, we're the ones that are going to be dying, not them. They'll be on their private islands and their private yachts and their private estates with their private armies, protecting them. We will be the victims. But when I say we, that does not include socialist countries. China will bounce back. They have been attacked by the West since the communists came in power in 1949. They've done nothing but get stronger and stronger since Mao took over on October 1st of that year, and they will continue to get stronger. You look at Russia, which has noble leadership in Putin and his government. They will do what they can to help their people. So what's going to happen is China is going to come out smelling like a rose on this thing because their banks are people-owned. They don't have private. Well, they have 16 little small private banks, but they don't amount to a hill of beans. But the four biggest banks in the world are Chinese. They're bigger than the American and European banks, but they're owned by the people. So they have socialist banking. There's no real estate, private real estate ownership in China. It's all 70-year leases. The insurance is all public. All the major industries are publicly owned. And so they can plan, they can allocate assets, and they can allocate people and keep people employed. They don't borrow money from a private bankers like the West does, the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank are borrowing money from the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the Morgans and paying billions of dollars and euros a year, in interest to these private bankers. China doesn't have that problem because they print their own money. So China is, if you'll pardon the pun, well vaccinated for any global depression, no matter how bad it is. And they're the manufacturing powerhouse of the world. So they've got the manufacturing, they've got the technology, and they've got 1.4 billion people to sell to. So if the United States implodes, and I wouldn't be surprised if it does, and of course they'll declare martial law and turn it into a military junta, China will come out of this thing smelling like a rose and be a hero to the people of the world for what they did.
Okay, Jeff, I guess with about 3 or 4 minutes left, let's address the most important question in that time frame. Where did the virus come from? Trump recently called it China virus, blaming China for the spread of the virus. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman said that it might be the U.S. Army who brought the virus to Wuhan, referring to a contingent of 300 U.S. military that attended the military games in Wuhan in October 2019. What is your take on the origin of the virus?
And we have about 90 seconds left.
Well, the origin, I mean, no one, it's the 800-pound gorilla in the epidemiological room that no one wants to talk about.
We have like a little over a minute left. Okay.
The director of the CDC even admitted to Congress that it started in the United States back before in September. So, and you can trace it back genetically back to the United States. So it definitely came from the United States. 326 American soldiers stayed in hotels right next to the sea market or the fish market, where it was supposedly broke out in Wuhan. It doesn't take much to connect the dots. They did very poorly in the games. They did worse than like Bahrain. I mean, they were not athletes. They were probably operatives to set this thing up to infect Wuhan. And if the CDC director says it came from the United States, the America's top microbiologist, I think that's where it came from.
Thank you, Jeff, for being my guest on the show.
Thank you, Dan. I can't wait to see it on SoundCloud. Thank you.
Thank you. You have been listening to Speaking Truth to Empire on KFCF 88.1 FM, independently owned and locally operated since 1975 in Fresno. We were speaking with Jeff J. Brown, a geopolitical analyst and author of China Trilogy. Thank you for listening. My name is Dan Yaseen, host of the show. I will be back third Wednesday of next month.